Greetings from Brazil. I'm Jim Griffith. I was born, raised, and educated in the United States. I was born, raised, and educated in the United States, but I've been living in Brazil since 1976. I've been busy raising a family and teaching at the Federal University of Viçosa. My areas of professional work have been in parks management and planning. I used to be a ranger for the U.S. National Park Service. I've also worked in ecological restoration, especially in mining. And for the last few years, I've been involved in doing environmental philosophy. I'm going to talk today on the following topic: an environmental philosophy evaluation of land remediation in Brazil. Brazil is a major world producer of minerals, for example, iron ore. Now, I'm speaking to you from the state of Minas Gerais, that means General Mines. And this state has produced, the last data that I can get for annual production, has produced nearly 360 million metric tons. And this represents over 64% of the country's iron ore production. So this is really significant. And as you can imagine, this has severe impacts on the environment. Considering the large-scale environmental impact of mining, these on environmental justice, this means we have to do a good job of recuperating disturbed lands. Now, I understand that there are two types of stress. There's an acute stress, things that happen quickly, such as events. Might be a tailing mine collapse. We've had that happen a couple of times now in Brazil, several times, matter of fact. Or it could be gradual. It could be that over a number of years, mining is beginning to expand in a region. It might be, could be the problem that we're having in the Amazon, the Pantanal region with fires. There's also gradual stress too, which increases year by year. But all of these impact these different spheres. We always think of the biosphere, but we have the hydrosphere, the water, soils and the lithosphere, the atmosphere, and of course the sociosphere. The technologies being used to recuperate disturbed lands are quite advanced in Brazil. I had the privilege of starting back in the 1970s when there were only just a half a dozen of us in Brazil. And we really didn't know too much about each other because we had no internet. Occasionally we'd go to some sort of seminar on another subject, and maybe someone would be presenting something on what they were trying to do in land remediation. But today, that's changed completely. We have sorts of scenes that you see there on the right-hand image. We're now able to return the landscape to some similarity to what it was before. And we're also now using native species. Those are just two examples. There are many other examples. If you look at this mosaic of images, if you start up in the upper left-hand corner and move down, moved horizontally, you'll see mining pre-planning, which includes future reclamation projects. You plan them right from the start. You can see an example of topographic reconstruction, drainage infrastructure, erosion control blankets on slopes, planting native species, acid drainage remediation, hydroseeding, topsoil salvage and reapplication, and of course, university research programs, which is what I've been involved in as well as teaching. However, although that all sounds good, when you visit these mines, you do field visits, one gets the feeling that something vital is still missing. Something isn't quite right. Is there some sort of imbalance? There doesn't seem to be, let's say, a sense of place. And these mining areas, at least in the state of Minas Gerais, are near large population centers. I present this model to you as how I understand what's going on. You have to have cognitive balance. in the way you think about our relationship to nature and relationship, in this case, to the mining activities. What we want is a holistic vision of recuperation, a holistic vision of recuperation that you see there with a star around it. Now, that requires two domains of our cognition. In the lower right-hand corner, objectivism. What's that? Objectivism is reality as facts apart from personal reflections or feelings. So that's one part. Then up in the upper left-hand corner, you have subjectivism, reality as perceived rather than as independent of mind. I really like this duck and rabbit diagram. It was Ludwig Wittgenstein who used that. The idea is that our mind is able to work with seemingly contradictory images, but we can handle that. And I've drawn here an infinity loop, or what you might call a Mobius strip, where sometimes you're working with objectivism, sometimes with subjectivism. And as the two interact, you should have a holistic vision of recuperation. However, what I think has happened is that there's little subjectivism to be found in the Brazilian mining landscapes, reclamation landscapes. They mostly reflect applied positivistic science, and I'll explain that in just a little bit, what positivism is. So there's an extreme of objectivism. Taken to the extreme, calculations and equations are considered not just symbols or abstract models, they're thought to be the real world itself. I suspect that national traditions and Brazilian national traditions of positivism and extreme representationalism are deeply embedded traditions in Brazilian thinking. Amos Nascimento is also participating in this webinar today, and I have researched this. We've researched the intellectual roots of Brazilian environmental philosophy, and we think that this may be an intellectual culprit, in my case, for degraded lands. There's even a church in Brazil which was constructed to celebrate positivism, the Positive Church of Brazil in Rio. It's not in such good shape today. It needs to be restored as an historic monument. So it's not as powerful as it used to be, but this had a big influence in Brazil in the last century. Well, what is positivism? It comes from the philosophy of Auguste Comte. You probably know him as the father of sociology. And his ideas spread all over Brazil. Comte thought of social engineering, he revered social engineering and promoted science, especially Newtonian physics. And I thought it was interesting that our chancellor this morning mentioned that. He promoted Newtonian physics as being a new religion of humanity. So this is where this comes from. And in fact, the Brazilian flag has a positivist slogan on it, part of a slogan, order and progress. So that gives you an idea of how important this has been in Brazil. Well, what do you do if there's this extreme? What's your suggestion? What would you do? And this is my suggestion. I have thoroughly, I'll say it, enjoyed reading over the last few years the work of two Chilean biologists, philosopher-biologists, Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. I'm not sure that, I know that Varela is no longer with us. And Maturana, I saw him 10 years ago and he was, I think, in his early 80s. So I'm not sure if he's still with us. But they've written several books, and they're most interesting, and I have here the English version, The Tree of Knowledge. And what did they say? This is my suggestion. Ecological restoration worldwide could benefit from applying a clear and logical epistemological accounting. Epistemology, as you may know, is the philosophy of knowledge. A clear and logical epistemological accounting, as these two Chileans have espoused. And this should be applied to the knowledge base used in recuperation projects. My recommendation to solve the objectivism problem: incorporate narrative, a major component of subjectivism into landscape recuperation projects. Here's a very interesting book for you to write down. I'm going to give you a bibliography at the ending where you can see this more completely. This is a book by Pottinger and Puritan, published in 1998, called Landscape Narratives. And in the introductory chapters, they say, what does narrative consist of? Well, it's story and it's telling. And if you follow the telling column, moving down, how the narrative expresses itself in film, verbal, dance, but it also expresses itself in landscape. That's the one with the little blue star by it. And there's several landscape narrative design practices that we can put into these mining reclamation landscapes. And what are they? And this book is divided into chapters according to these different techniques or practices: naming, sequencing, revealing, concealing, gathering, and opening. I won't have time to go through those with you. I wish I could. But if you'll take a look at this book, you'll see how these could be applied, and this will help us get narrative into our land remediation work. Well, what's the ideal narration about it? Well, the ideal narration about a mining region's history is to tell how something that used to be unified, the landscape was unified before we started messing with it. It was a whole. It was a pre-mining landscape. But it got fragmented into parts by the excavation. So here you have moving from left to right, you have the whole, and then you have it fragmented into parts by all those excavations. And this affects the health and the integrity of the landscape. And it broke off the ecological trajectory that the landscape was following naturally before we started messing with it or digging into it. There was an ecological trajectory, but this was broken. So what we need to talk about is what happens after the mining. You see the historic, the trajectory has broken. And then what we want to try to do is continuation of this trajectory. However, after the valuable minerals have been mined out, there should be already, that's the pre-planning, there should be already occurring a recomposition of the parts to make the landscape whole again. And they're your spheres again, your biosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, sociosphere, etc. To make the landscape whole again, a process was planned for and initiated right from the beginning of the mining project. It's not an afterthought. It's not an appendix. It begins right at the beginning. And here's just a little example from here in my region of near Viçosa, the state of Minas Gerais. This used to be high forest up to 120 years ago. A lot of it was cut mostly for coffee, and the wood went to for construction in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. So now we have these rolling hills with pasture lands, marginal agriculture. We have small property owners in our region. But take a look at this. You see on the left there, that little island of trees. I've been following that. That's on our campus. Our campus has about 1,000 hectares. And I've been following that little island. The narrative is interesting. That little island, it's been protected for some reason, and it's been coincidence. But as you see on the right, it's developing. It's following its ecological trajectory, which is typical for this region. In fact, that's the definition of ecological restoration. Attempts to return the ecosystem to its historic trajectory. This comes from the International Society for Ecological Restoration. You can look them up, SARE International. By the way, the seed source in this case is coming from over the hill. You can see the forest on the top of the hill there, and the seeds are coming by wildlife or by wind, or in some cases even by gravity. So that's what we're trying to do. And this is the narration that we want to tell, that I think will make a difference. My conclusions, and this gets back to Amos Nascimento's and my research earlier on, historic intellectual attitudes and paradigms about humans and nature, common to Latin America, and especially to Brazil, have negatively influenced land remediation. Current practices that envision environmental justice need to be better adjusted. I'm doing a play on words there, but I say this sincerely. If you want to better adjust things, and I see the word adjust, justice, then we're going to have to improve these current practices. National traditions of positivism and extreme representationalism may be the intellectual culprits. Ecological restoration worldwide could benefit from applying a clear and logical accounting of knowledge. That diagram, remember that? Back with the infinity loop and the Mobius strip, and the rabbit and duck between the two. As advocated by Umberto Maturana, Francisco Varela, the knowledge base used in recuperation projects. Thank you.